A tiny change in a genetic code begins in the Near East or West Eurasia about 22,000 to 28,000 years ago, and it does something that sounds impossible. It starts as a single typo in the biological library of one person. It has no name yet, and for thousands of years it has no power. It is just a silent passenger. But this one mutation, known today as RRS142XX54 within the SLC24A5 gene, is waiting for the world to change around it. When the moment comes, it will not just survive, it will rewrite the face of a continent. It will turn a population that had been dark-skinned for 40 millennia into the pale-skinned Europeans of the modern imagination, and it will do it so fast and so completely that future generations will forget it ever happened. If you walk down a street in London or Berlin today, you see a version of history that feels permanent. You see light skin and assume it was always there, hanging over the continent like a cloud. You assume that as soon as humans stepped into the gloom of Northern Europe, the sun faded them out. That is the story most people carry in their heads. It feels logical, it feels intuitive, and it is completely wrong. The reality is much sharper and far more dangerous for the people who lived through it. The white Europe look is not an ancient fixture of the Ice Age. It is a newcomer. It arrived late, it arrived from somewhere else, and it fought its way to the top through a brutal gauntlet of diet, disease, and migration. To understand how this takeover happened, you have to look at the world before the mutation took charge. You have to look at the people who lived in Europe when it was still wild. These were the Western hunter-gatherers. They lived in the same northern latitudes, walked under the same gray skies, and shivered in the same winters. But they did not look like the Europeans of today. For 45,000 years, from the Upper Paleolithic into the Mesolithic, the people of Europe kept the dark skin of their African ancestors. They carried the ancestral alleles in their skin color genes, the versions that build a shield of dark pigment. This wasn't an accident. It was a survival strategy. In the intense sun of Africa, dark skin is a necessary armor. It protects folate, a vital nutrient for reproduction, from being destroyed by UV radiation. If you lose folate, babies don't grow right and pregnancies fail. Dark skin locked that safety in. When humans moved north, you might expect that armor to become a burden immediately. After all, the north has weak sun. The body needs UV light to penetrate the skin and create vitamin D. If the skin is too dark and the sun is too weak, vitamin D production crashes. And vitamin D is not optional. It builds bones. It drives the immune system. Without it, you get rickets, deformed limbs, and early death. So why did the hunter-gatherers stay dark? How did they survive in Ice Age Europe without the mutation? They had a secret weapon that modern people often forget: their dinner. These people were hunters and fishers. They ate wild game and fatty fish, foods that are naturally packed with vitamin D. They didn't need their skin to work overtime because their diet did the heavy lifting. As long as they chased the herds and caught the fish, they could keep their dark skin without paying a penalty. The mutation for light skin existed, floating around in the gene pool of the Near East, but in Europe, there was no urgent job for it to do. So the dark skin stayed. It was the norm. It was the baseline. This is where the story introduces a witness who breaks the comfortable picture people have of the past. In a cave in northern Spain, scientists found the remains of a man who lived about 7,000 years ago. They named him Labranja I. When they read his DNA, they expected to see a proto-Spaniard, someone who looked like a modern person in archaic clothes. Instead, the computer gave them a combination that looked like a mistake. Labranja carried the mutations for piercing blue eyes, but in his skin genes, specifically SLC24A5 and SLC45A2, he carried the ancestral versions. The computer predicted his skin was dark to black. A few thousand miles away, in a cave in Britain, another man tells the same story. He is known as Cheddar Man, and he lived about 10,000 years ago. Like Labranya, he had the genetic signature for blue eyes. And like Labranya, his skin genes were ancestral. He had dark to black skin, paired with dark curly hair. These men were not rare freaks of nature. They were the standard. They proved that the features we bundle together today, light skin and light eyes, did not travel as a matching set. Blue eyes rose early, likely due to sexual selection or drift, spreading through the hunter-gatherers while their skin stayed dark. The European look was a mosaic, not a monolith, but the stasis couldn't last. The world was about to shift under their feet. The change didn't come from the weather, it came from a new way of living. Around 9,000 years ago, a new group of people began moving into Europe from Anatolia and the Near East. They were not hunters, they were farmers. They brought seeds for wheat and barley. They brought cattle, and they brought the mutation. The Neolithic farmers carried the derived allele of SLC24A5, the famous variant RS1R4R26654 that lightens skin. They arrived in Greece and the Balkans and began to spread. They moved along two main highways. One route hugged the Mediterranean coast, hopping from island to island like stones in a river. The other route pushed inland. Following the Danube River Valley into the heart of the continent, they moved fast. Within about 2,500 years, they had reached Iberia and Central Europe. These farmers had a massive advantage over the locals. Numbers. Farming produces more food than hunting. More food means more babies. The data shows that the farmer groups were about 5 times larger than the hunter-gatherer bands they encountered. They didn't just visit, they swamped the landscape. They interbred with the locals, but the sheer weight of their population meant their genes began to take over. This process wasn't a war of conquest, it was a mathematical certainty. When a large group mixes with a small group, the large group's DNA becomes the future. But the farmers also brought a hidden danger. Their diet was different. They didn't eat the vitamin D-rich wild fish and game that the hunter-gatherers relied on. They ate grains. Wheat is a miracle for filling bellies, but it is useless for vitamin D. Suddenly, the nutritional safety net was gone. These farmers were living in the same low-light north as the hunters, but without the dietary protection. They hit a nutritional bottleneck. This is the moment the mutation RS1426654 stopped being a passenger and became a savior. In a population eating wheat under gray skies, anyone with darker skin faced a severe penalty. They couldn't make enough vitamin D. Their bones softened, their immune systems faltered. Women, who need even more calcium and vitamin D for pregnancy and breastfeeding, hit the wall hardest. If you couldn't process the weak sunlight, your line ended. But the people who carried the SLC24A5 mutation had a loophole. The mutation changed the way their skin cells handled pigment, specifically cutting down the production of eumelanin. This lighter skin let the UV rays penetrate deeper. It turned the skin into a more efficient solar panel. The difference was massive. Carriers of the light skin alleles could produce vitamin D 5 to 6 times better than those with the ancestral dark skin. In the brutal math of evolution, that is a winning lottery ticket. The mutation surged. It wasn't just drifting anymore. It was being pushed by intense natural selection. It saved the mothers, it saved the babies, and so it appeared in more and more people with every generation. The transformation wasn't instant. It was a messy, uneven process. For thousands of years, Europe was a patchwork. You had dark-skinned hunter-gatherers watching the forests and lighter-skinned farmers clearing the valleys. You had mixed children who carried both legacies, but the wave kept coming. The final hammer blow fell in the Bronze Age around 5,000 to 4,000 years ago. This time, the migrants came from the east, the Yamnaya herders from the Pontic steppe. They were tall, mobile, and they rode horses, wagons. They brought yet another genetic tool, the SLC45A2 allele, which also lightens skin. They also brought the genes for lactose tolerance, allowing adults to drink milk, another way to get calcium and vitamin D. The Yamnaya moved into northern and central Europe and replaced up to 75% of the local ancestry in some regions. This was a population turnover on a scale that is hard to imagine today. They didn't just add to the mix, they reshaped it. By the time the dust settled around 3,000 years ago, the old combination of dark skin and blue eyes had largely faded. The new alleles for light skin, SLC4A5 from the farmers and SLC4A5A2 from the steppes, had reached fixation. That means they were present in almost 100% of the population. The mutation that had started as a single typo in the Near East had conquered the continent. It had done it through migration, through mixing, and through the ruthless pressure of a vitamin-starved diet. This story carries a trap for the unwary. It is easy to look at this sweep and think, aha, light skin is just the inevitable result of living in the north. But if you look east, that logic breaks. East Asia has the same low latitudes, it has the same cloudy skies, it has the same need for vitamin D. But the famous SLC24A5 mutation is almost completely missing there. It barely exists in China, Japan, or Korea. Why? Because ancestry is about history, not just geography. The ancestors of East Asians separated from the West Eurasian lineage before this specific mutation arose. When SLC24A5 was born in the Near East, the East Asian populations were already gone, separated by vast distances and formidable barriers like the Himalayas and the steppes. The mutation couldn't reach them. It hit a wall, so East Asians had to solve the vitamin D problem with a different set of tools. They evolved light skin, but they did it using different genes like OCA2 and KITLG. It is a case of parallel evolution, two separated groups facing the same problem and finding different genetic solutions. The SLC24A5 mutation didn't stop at Europe's borders, though. Because it rode with people, it went wherever they went. It traveled south into the Middle East. It traveled east into South Asia. The ancient movements of people took identical haplotypes, matching blocks of DNA, into North India and Pakistan. In some of those populations today, the frequency of this European light skin gene hits 100%, while in others, it drops off. It mirrors the complex history of caste, marriage, and migration in the region. It proves that the gene is not a marker of a single race or a single country. It is a marker of shared movement, a breadcrumb trail left by ancestors who walked out of the Near East and went in every direction. This brings us to the present and to the reason this history matters. We live in a time where people often treat ancestry like a rigid box. They look at a face and think they know the history behind it. But the story of La Bragna and Cheddar Man shatters those boxes. It tells us that the European phenotype, the look that people think is ancient and pure, is actually a recent construction. It was assembled late, from parts that came from different places. The blue eyes came from the deep Paleolithic hunters. The light skin came from the Near Eastern farmers and the steppe herders. The ability to drink milk came from the pastoralists. Consider the modern story of Meghan Markle, a woman who walked into the rigid world of the British royal family and ignited a global conversation about color and identity. Her presence challenged the idea of who belongs in a European lineage. But if you look at the data, the irony is sharp. The traditional look of the British aristocracy she married into is itself a product of massive admixture and migration. The purity is a myth. The very genes that paint the pale skins of the royal family are immigrant genes, arrivals that displaced the dark-skinned locals who built the first monuments on that island. Meghan's experience mirrors the ancient reality. Identity is never static. It is always a negotiation between who was there, who is arriving, and how they mix. The anxiety people feel about changing demographics today is an echo of the massive shifts that happened 5,000 and 9,000 years ago. The only difference is that today we watch it on television. Back then, it was played out in the silence of the genome. There is a penalty for ignoring this story. If you don't know it, you walk around with a false map of your own body. You look at your skin and think it is a simple label. You think it tells you who you are. But the reward for digging deeper is realizing that your skin is a historical document. It is a record of starvations avoided, of migrations survived, and of the incredible luck of your ancestors. The allele SLC24A5 is the most successful traveler you have never met. It started small. It rode the wave of the farming revolution. It saved its carriers when the diet changed and the sun failed them. It hitched a ride on the wagons of the steppe herders, and today it sits in the cells of millions of people who have no idea that their appearance is a scar from a desperate battle for vitamin D. So the next time you step outside on a gray winter day and feel the weak sun on your face, remember what is happening. Your body is quietly working to catch the light, using a tool that was forged in the Near East and sharpened by the hunger of the Neolithic. You are not looking at a static picture of the past. You are looking at the result of a 20,000-year-old survival story that is still written on your skin.